The will that sparked the fire. It all began with a single sentence, one I never thought would cause an earthquake in my home. I want my children to inherit my things when I'm gone. I said it casually, almost absent-mindedly, during dinner one night. My stepdaughters were at the table, picking at their food, their eyes sharp and watchful as always. My husband looked up at me with surprise, but said nothing. To me, it was common sense. My jewelry, my books, my mother's old ring, things tied to my bloodline, my history would one day belong to my own children. But to them, to the stepdaughters who had tolerated me more than loved me, it was the spark that lit the fuse. At first, there was silence. They exchanged glances, whispers curling between them like smoke. Then came the coldness, the little comments, the way they shut me out of conversations, their laughter dying whenever I entered the room. I tried to brush it off. After all, they weren't my daughters. I had always known there would be distance between us. But something shifted that night. My words had drawn a line, and suddenly I was on one side and they on the other. The betrayal revealed itself slowly. One evening, I overheard them in the hallway. Their voices were low, venomous, yet trembling with suppressed rage. She doesn't care about us. She only cares about her own children. She thinks we're nothing. Just wait, you'll see. It chilled me. Not because of what they said, but because of the tone. It wasn't just anger, it was plotting. I began noticing things disappearing. Small at first, an old necklace, a family photograph, a letter my mother had written me. I thought I was losing my mind, misplacing things. But then I saw one of my stepdaughters wearing the necklace, flaunting it in front of me with a smile too sweet to be innocent. When I confronted her, she only shrugged. It doesn't matter, does it? It'll be mine eventually. My blood turned cold. The tension seeped into my marriage. My husband, caught between his daughters and me, began to withdraw. He accused me of being harsh, of creating drama, of imagining conspiracies where there were none. But I wasn't imagining it. The stepdaughters had started a campaign, a quiet, calculated war. They whispered in his ear, telling him I was selfish, manipulative, trying to drive a wedge between him and his children. They twisted every word I said, every action I took, until he began looking at me with suspicion instead of trust. And then came the final blow. One evening, after weeks of icy silence and hidden daggers, I found them gathered around the fireplace with my husband. On the table was a document. My heart sank when I realized what it was, a rewritten will. Not mine, his. They had convinced him to secure their future, to ensure they would inherit everything. My children, my blood, were erased from the picture in favor of his first family. When I confronted him, my voice shaking with fury and betrayal, he only said, "It's only fair. They were here first." I stood there, hollow, as the pieces fell into place. My stepdaughters hadn't just been angry, they had been patient, cunning, and ruthless. They had taken my words, twisted them into a weapon, and used it to strip my children of their future. And yet, the cruelest part wasn't losing the inheritance. It was realizing that in the end, they didn't just betray me, they had turned the man I loved against me. The house grew colder. Love turned into suspicion, warmth into silence. I began to wonder if betrayal always starts with something so small, a single sentence spoken without thought, and if that's all it takes to bring an entire family to ruin. Continuation seeds of revenge. The night I discovered the rewritten will, something inside me died. It wasn't just the betrayal of my stepdaughters, it was the look in my husband's eyes as he signed it. Cold, detached, almost relieved, as though cutting away my children's future was lifting a weight off his shoulders. For days I drifted through the house like a ghost. My stepdaughters, triumphant, flaunted their victory. They paraded through my rooms, touched my belongings, laughed a little too loudly when I entered. I had become a stranger in my own home. But grief has a strange way of turning into clarity, and clarity into resolve. I told myself, if they want a war, I'll give them one. At first, I pretended to surrender. I smiled weakly, nodded when they mocked me, allowed them to believe I was broken. My husband relaxed, convinced I had accepted the new reality. My stepdaughters grew careless, their whispers less guarded, their cruelty less hidden. and in their arrogance, they revealed too much. I overheard them boasting about how they had manipulated their father, feeding him lies, twisting my words, planting seeds of doubt until he saw me as selfish and untrustworthy. They bragged about the will, how one day everything would belong to them. I realized then they weren't just after inheritance. They wanted erasure. They wanted to erase me, my children, our place in this family. That was their mistake. I began keeping records. Quietly, patiently. I saved every message, every careless remark, every stolen belonging I found in their rooms. I noted the dates when items went missing, the times they tried to turn my husband against me. I also sought out allies. My children, though young, understood enough to see how cruel their stepsisters had become. Neighbors noticed, too. Friends whispered their concerns. Piece by piece, I built a foundation not just of proof but of support. And then I made my move. One evening, during another family dinner, I stood up with calm I didn't feel. My husband, irritated by my sudden presence of strength, frowned. My stepdaughters smirked, already preparing their sharp tongues. But this time, I was ready. I laid the evidence on the table, photos of my missing belongings in their rooms, transcripts of their messages, even recordings of their whispered plots when they thought I wasn't listening. The room fell silent. My husband's face drained of color as the truth unraveled before him. "Here is your fairness," I said coldly. "This is what you chose when you believed them over me." For once, my stepdaughters were speechless. Their smirks crumbled into panic. The aftermath was chaos. My husband raged not at me, but at them. He felt humiliated, tricked by his own daughters. The will he had signed became a symbol of his foolishness, and the shame gnawed at him day and night. The stepdaughters, desperate to salvage their power, tried to manipulate him again. But the seed of doubt I planted had taken root. He saw through their lies now, even when he didn't want to. But here's the twist. I didn't stop there. I filed a legal petition, securing my children's rights. I revealed the thefts publicly, ensuring the family name carried the stain of their schemes. I made it so their betrayal followed them, whispered about it every gathering, every corner of our community. And as for the inheritance, I ensured it was locked down not just for my children, but protected so no one could touch it without my consent. The house is quiet now, but not peaceful. My stepdaughters slink around like shadows, their laughter gone, replaced by resentment. My husband looks at me differently, not with love, perhaps, but with wary respect, as though he finally realized I was not someone to be underestimated. And me? I learned something valuable. Betrayal is not the end, it is the beginning of transformation. They tried to erase me, but instead I carved my name into stone. I sometimes wonder if they regret starting this war. But then I remember the look in their eyes, the fear when they realized I had outplayed them. And I know, regret is the least of what they deserve.